I'm Courtney, 30, from Charlotte, North Carolina. My boyfriend Mason had been struggling with anxiety and stress from work. I supported him through everything: sleepless nights, panic attacks, even helped him find a therapist. He told me he'd started weekly sessions every Wednesday night. He'd leave around 6 p.m., come back calm and reflective. I was proud of him for working on himself. One evening, I had to drop something off at his place while he was at therapy. As I pulled into his complex, I saw his car parked outside the building, but the lights in his apartment were off. Weird. I drove around and, just out of curiosity, swung by the 24-hour gym 5 blocks away. It was 7:15 p.m. And there he was. At the front desk. Laughing with a woman. In workout clothes. No therapy folder, no notes, no phone in sight. Just flirtation and flexing. I didn't confront him right away. I waited until next Wednesday. I followed him. He didn't even go through the motions, straight to the gym, straight to her. I took photos. Videos. Time stamps. The next day, I called the therapist he claimed to be seeing, a real person. She confirmed Mason had come once. Months ago. That night, I printed the photos and taped them to his bathroom mirror, right next to his dumbbells. On top, I wrote, "How's leg day? Because the lies aren't holding you up anymore." Then I packed my things. He tried to call. Said he needed to explain. I texted back, "I hope she's as good at pretending to listen as I was." Blocked. Deleted. And free. Mason and I had been together for almost 3 years when the anxiety started. It wasn't sudden, more like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, rolling in slowly until they consumed everything. He'd always been ambitious, working at a prestigious investment firm downtown that demanded 60-hour weeks and constant performance. I admired his drive, but I also saw what it was doing to him. The first panic attack happened on a Tuesday night. We were watching a movie on his couch when suddenly his breathing changed. His hands started shaking, and his eyes darted around the room like he was looking for exits that didn't exist. "I can't breathe," he gasped, clutching at his chest. "Something's wrong with me." I held him for nearly an hour, talking him through breathing exercises I'd learned from my own struggles with anxiety in college. When it finally passed, he looked so defeated, so unlike the confident man I'd fallen for. "This isn't me, Court," he whispered. "I don't know what's happening." After the third attack in 2 weeks, I started researching therapists. I made calls during my lunch breaks, compiled lists of professionals who specialized in anxiety and work-related stress, checked which ones accepted his insurance. I was all in, ready to support him through whatever this was. "You don't have to do this alone," I told him, sliding a list of 3 highly recommended therapists across his kitchen counter. "These people can help. I've checked everything, they have evening appointments, their offices aren't far from your work, and they all have experience with high-pressure careers." Mason stared at the list, jaw tight. He hated feeling vulnerable, hated needing help. But after another sleepless night where he paced his apartment until 4 a.m. while I dozed fitfully on the couch, he finally called Dr. Melissa Chen. "I have an appointment next Wednesday," he told me 3 days later, kissing the top of my head as I worked on my laptop at his dining table. 6 o'clock. I remember feeling such relief, such hope. I even cried a little after he went to shower, overwhelmed with gratitude that he was taking this step. That first Wednesday, I texted him encouragement before his appointment and waited anxiously for him to return. When he walked through the door around 8 p.m., he seemed calmer than I'd seen him in months. "It was good," he said simply. She listened. Really listened. The following weeks established a pattern. Mason would leave for therapy on Wednesdays, returning with a quiet, reflective demeanor. Sometimes he'd share small insights from his sessions, breathing techniques for stress management, recognizing catastrophic thinking patterns. Other times he'd be silent but relaxed, like something heavy had been lifted from his shoulders. Dr. Chen says I should start journaling, he mentioned one night about a month into his therapy. Writing down the thoughts instead of letting them spin in my head. I bought him a leather-bound journal the next day. He seemed genuinely touched, kissing me deeply and promising to use it. I never asked to read it, therapy was his journey, and I wanted to respect his privacy. That journal stayed in his nightstand drawer, and occasionally I'd see him writing in it before bed. Work remained intense, but the panic attacks grew less frequent. Mason seemed to be developing coping strategies. He'd excuse himself during stressful moments, returning more centered. He downloaded meditation apps on his phone. He even started mentioning going to the gym occasionally, to burn off the anxious energy, as Dr. Chen apparently suggested. Physical activity can really help with anxiety, he explained one Sunday morning as he packed a small gym bag. Gets the endorphins flowing, breaks the cycle of worry. I was proud of him. So proud. I bragged to my friends about how seriously he was taking his mental health, how he was embracing therapy instead of fighting it like so many men did. My best friend Alicia had been trying to get her boyfriend to see someone for his depression for years with no success. "You're lucky," she told me over coffee. "Most guys would rather suffer in silence than admit they need help." "Mason's different," I said, believing it with my whole heart. "He's doing the work." I didn't think twice when his Wednesday therapy sessions occasionally stretched longer, sometimes keeping him out until 8:30 or 9. Therapy could be unpredictable, sometimes you hit on something important and needed extra time to process it. I was just grateful he was getting the help he needed. Until that Wednesday in early October, 6 months into his therapy journey. I'd left my laptop charger at his place, and I had a major presentation the next morning. Mason had a key to my apartment, but I didn't have one to his, another red flag I'd ignored, justifying it because he'd had a bad experience with an ex who wouldn't return his key after they broke up. I tried calling to see if he could swing by my place after his session to drop it off, but he didn't answer. Probably had his phone on silent for therapy. Fine. I just stopped by his apartment afterward and grab it myself. He always left a spare key with the building manager for emergencies. I figured I'd arrive around 8, giving him plenty of time to get home from his 6 o'clock appointment. When I pulled into the parking lot at 7:40, I was surprised to see his silver Audi in its usual spot. Maybe he'd finished early. But the windows of his ground-floor apartment were dark. No movement, no lights. "That's strange," I muttered to myself, double-checking the time. I called him again. Straight to voicemail. I sat in my car, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he'd gotten a ride with someone else. But why? His car was fine, we'd taken it to dinner just the night before. A little voice in my head, the one I always tried to silence for being paranoid, whispered that something wasn't adding up. If he wasn't at therapy, and he wasn't home, where was he? That's when I remembered his occasional mentions of the gym. Meridian Fitness was just 5 blocks down, a sleek 24-hour place that had opened earlier that year. Without really planning to, I found myself driving in that direction. This is silly, I told myself. He's probably just picking up groceries or something after therapy. I almost turned around. Almost. But as I approached the gym, something compelled me to pull into the parking lot. Just to check. Just to quiet that nagging voice. And there, through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the gym, I saw him. Mason. My Mason. In gray athletic shorts and a fitted black t-shirt, leaning against the reception desk. Laughing. Not the restrained chuckle he'd been limited to lately, but a full, head-thrown-back laugh I hadn't seen in months. And across from him, a petite blonde in purple leggings and a sports bra, touching his arm as she laughed with him. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just sat there, watching them through the glass, feeling like I was observing someone else's life. This couldn't be real. Mason was supposed to be at therapy. Dr. Chen's office was across town. He was supposed to be working on himself, fighting his demons, becoming stronger. He was not supposed to be flexing his biceps for some gym bunny while I sat in my car like an idiot, worrying about whether his therapy session had gone well. The woman handed Mason something, a water bottle, I realized. Their fingers lingered during the exchange. He said something that made her smile, then checked his watch. They walked together toward the weight room, her hand briefly touching the small of his back in a gesture so intimate it made me physically ill. I drove home in a daze, forgetting all about my laptop charger. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing them laughing, touching, connecting in a way that seemed so easy, so natural. So different from the strained, careful interactions Mason and I had been having lately as I tried to support his healing journey. What a joke. What an absolute, humiliating joke. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, something cold and calm settled over me. If Mason could play this game, so could I. The next morning, I texted him normally. Asked how his session had gone. He responded with his usual post-therapy text, good. Intense but good. Talked about work stress. Miss you. I bit back the rage and responded, proud of you. Dinner at my place Friday? For the next week, I pretended nothing had changed. I smiled at his stories, listened to his complaints about work, even sat through a detailed explanation of some breakthrough he'd supposedly had with Dr. Chen about his fear of inadequacy. All while silently collecting evidence. Because Wednesday was coming again. And this time, I'd be ready. I spent the next 6 days preparing. I borrowed my friend Alicia's car, a nondescript Honda Civic that Mason had never seen before. I bought a baseball cap and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous but determined. I even downloaded a GPS tracking app and managed to sync it with Mason's phone during dinner on Friday night while he was in the bathroom. Technology had always been my strength, not his. You seem distracted, he commented over dessert, reaching for my hand across the table. I forced a smile. Just thinking about a project at work. Deadline coming up. He nodded sympathetically. I know how that goes. Want to talk about it? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, offering to listen to my problems while living a complete lie. I squeezed his hand and shook my head. It's boring stuff. Tell me more about your day instead. And he did, weaving elaborate stories about difficult clients and office politics, stories I now wondered if were even true. How much of what I knew about Mason was real, and how much was fabrication? Wednesday arrived with agonizing slowness. I left work early, claiming a migraine, and changed into jeans and a dark hoodie in a gas station bathroom. I felt like I was in some ridiculous spy movie, but the pain driving my actions was all too real. I parked Alicia's car a block away from Mason's apartment complex at 5:30 p.m. The tracking app showed he was still at work downtown, but moving, likely heading home. At 5:47, his silver Audi pulled into the complex. I slumped down in my seat, though I knew he wouldn't recognize Alicia's car even if he glanced my way. My heart pounded as I waited. Part of me still hoped for some explanation, that maybe he really did have therapy and just went to the gym afterward. That the woman was just a friendly trainer. That I had somehow misunderstood everything. At 6:03 p.m., Mason emerged from his apartment in workout clothes, black athletic shorts and a gray Duke University t-shirt. No folder. No notebook. Nothing that suggested he was headed to therapy. He checked his phone, got in his car, and drove away. I followed him, maintaining several car lengths between us, hardly believing I was actually doing this. The GPS tracker made it easy, even when I lost visual contact at a red light, I could see exactly where he was headed. And it wasn't to Dr. Chen's office across town. It was directly to Meridian Fitness. I parked across the street and watched through my windshield as Mason strolled into the gym, nodding casually to the front desk staff. He seemed relaxed, confident, not at all like someone preparing for an hour of intensive psychological work. I waited 15 minutes, then grabbed my gym bag from the back seat. I'd purchased a day pass to Meridian online the night before. The girl at the front desk barely looked at me as she scanned my QR code and waved me through. The gym was spacious and modern, with different zones for cardio, weights, and classes. I spotted Mason almost immediately. He was in the free weights area, but he wasn't working out. He was talking to her, the blonde from last week. Today she wore black leggings and a teal sports bra, her hair pulled back in a high ponytail. A small tattoo of what looked like a hummingbird peeked out from her shoulder blade. I positioned myself at a rowing machine with a clear view of them, pulled my cap lower, and pretended to adjust the settings. They weren't even pretending to exercise. Mason leaned against a weight rack, completely engaged in whatever story she was telling, occasionally reaching out to touch her arm or shoulder. I took out my phone and started recording. The distance was perfect, close enough to clearly identify them, far enough that they wouldn't notice. I captured several minutes of their interaction, including a moment when she stood on her tiptoes to whisper something in his ear that made him grin wickedly. They finally moved to the actual workout area, where he spotted her during bench presses, his hands lingering on her shoulders longer than necessary. I continued recording sporadically, changing positions around the gym to avoid drawing attention. At one point, they disappeared into the smoothie bar area. I gave them a few minutes, then casually walked past. They were sitting close at a small table, her hand resting on his thigh under the table while they shared a protein shake with 2 straws. The intimacy of it, the comfortable familiarity, told me this wasn't new. This had been going on for months, probably since shortly after his supposed therapy began. I stayed at the gym for nearly 2 hours, documenting their entire workout session, which involved maybe 20 minutes of actual exercise and a lot of touching, laughing, and what could only be described as foreplay disguised as fitness advice. When they finally separated, with a quick kiss in the hallway leading to the locker rooms, I slipped out and returned to my car. I sat there, hands shaking, looking through the photos and videos I'd collected. In one, the woman's name badge was visible, Amber, personal trainer. The pieces were all falling into place. Mason's improved mood after therapy. His sudden interest in fitness. The way he'd been more physically affectionate on Wednesday nights, as if charged up from another woman's touch. But I needed more. I needed to be absolutely certain. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen's office from a conference room at work. My voice was surprisingly steady as I spoke to the receptionist. "Hi, I'm calling about my boyfriend, Mason Donahue. He's been seeing Dr. Chen for anxiety for about 6 months now, and I just had a quick insurance question." "Let me check our records," the woman said. After a brief pause, "I'm not seeing any current patients by that name. When did you say he started treatment?" "April," I replied, my suspicions crystallizing into cold certainty. April 12th was his first appointment. More typing. "We do have a record of a Mason Donahue having an initial consultation on April 12th, but he never scheduled a follow-up appointment. Dr. Chen only saw him once." I thanked her and hung up, a strange calm settling over me. It was worse than I'd imagined. Not only was he cheating, but he'd fabricated an entire mental health journey, using my genuine concern and support as cover for his infidelity. All those nights I'd worried about him, researched coping strategies, walked on eggshells to avoid triggering his anxiety, while he was sliding his hands along Amber the personal trainer's perfectly toned body. I thought about confronting him immediately, considered calling him in a rage or showing up at his workplace. But that would give him a chance to spin more lies, to gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes. No. Mason deserved something more memorable. Something that would make it impossible for him to twist the narrative or paint me as the villain. I spent my lunch break at a photo printing kiosk, selecting the clearest, most damning images from my surveillance. Mason spotting Amber on the bench, his eyes fixed on her chest. Amber with her hand on his thigh. The kiss in the hallway, grainy but unmistakable. That evening, I went to his apartment while he was working late, another, high-stress project, that probably didn't exist. The building manager remembered me and happily let me in with the spare key, assuming I was surprising my boyfriend with dinner or something equally thoughtful. In a way, I was planning a surprise. Just not the kind she imagined. I went straight to his bathroom, the one place I knew he would go immediately after his Wednesday gym session with Amber. I arranged the photos in a semicircle around his mirror, using small pieces of tape that wouldn't damage the glossy prints. Right next to the mirror, he kept his prized dumbbells, expensive adjustable ones I'd given him for Christmas last year, ironically to help with his anxiety. Fitting that they would be part of this moment of truth. On the largest photo, the one of them kissing, I attached a note, "How's leg day?" Because the lies aren't holding you up anymore. I considered waiting there to see his reaction, but something in me couldn't bear to watch his face when he realized it was over. I didn't want his explanations or excuses. I didn't want to hear how it wasn't what it looked like or how Amber didn't mean anything to him. Instead, I went through his apartment, collecting my things, the spare toothbrush, my favorite sweater from his closet, the books I'd loaned him, the framed photo of us from our trip to Asheville last summer. I placed my key to his building on the kitchen counter. As I was about to leave, I noticed the leather-bound journal I'd bought him for his therapy sitting on his nightstand. I picked it up, curious if he'd ever actually used it for its intended purpose. The first few pages contained what looked like genuine anxiety journal entries. But as I flipped further, I found something else entirely. Sketches. Notes. Workout routines. And scattered throughout, references to meeting times, inside jokes, little reminders like A likes pineapple smoothies and A's birthday, June 24th. He'd used the journal I bought him to document his affair. I dropped it back on the nightstand like it had burned me and walked out of the apartment, out of Mason's life. It took exactly 3 hours for him to discover my parting gift. I was at Alicia's apartment, curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, when my phone exploded with notifications. First texts. "Courtney, please call me. It's not what you think. I can explain everything. Please answer your phone." Then calls, 8 in a row, each going to voicemail as I watched his name flash across my screen with detached interest. It was almost fascinating, seeing panic unfold in real time through a device. "What are you going to do?" Alicia asked, refilling my glass. "Nothing," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice was. "Absolutely nothing." His desperation escalated. More texts arrived. "I know I messed up. The therapy was real at first. She's just a friend who was helping me with fitness. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just let me explain in person." The last one made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that startled even me. "I love you, not her." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "You don't believe that, do you?" I showed her the journal entry I'd photographed before leaving, a list titled, "Things I Love About A," with 26 items lovingly detailed. I hadn't been able to resist documenting that final betrayal. Around midnight, when the calls finally stopped, I composed a single text. "I hope she's as good at pretending to listen as I was." Then I blocked his number, deleted his contact, and removed him from all my social media. Clean break. Complete extraction. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, flowers arrived at my office. Peonies, my favorite. The card read, "Please give me 15 minutes to explain. That's all I'm asking. M." I dropped them in the trash on my way out. The next day, he was waiting by my car after work. I almost didn't recognize him, his usually perfect hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked how I had felt for the past week. "Courtney, please," he started, pushing away from my car as I approached. "Just hear me out." I pressed my key fob to unlock the door. "Move away from my car, Mason." It wasn't an affair, he insisted, desperation edging his voice. Amber is just a trainer. Yes, we flirt, but nothing ever happened. I swear. I raised my eyebrows, remembering the hallway kiss I'd captured on video. That's your explanation? That you only emotionally cheated while pretending to be in therapy for anxiety that might not even be real? He flinched. The anxiety is real. I did see Dr. Chen once. The therapy was expensive, and I felt embarrassed about needing help, and the gym was helping more anyway. So you lied. For 6 months. Used me as your emotional support while pretending to be working on yourself. I didn't want to disappoint you, he whispered. You were so proud of me for going to therapy. And the gym was actually helping with the anxiety, I swear. I'm sure Amber's special training sessions were very therapeutic, I replied coldly, opening my car door. Does she know about me? Or am I just the foolish girlfriend you complain about to gain sympathy points? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. I got into my car. Don't contact me again, Mason. We're done. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, shoulders slumped. For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of something. Not regret, exactly. Maybe sadness for what could have been, if he'd been the man I thought he was. That night, Alicia and our other friend Zoe took me out for what they called liberation drinks. 3 margaritas in, Zoe raised an important question. So what happens when he shows up at your apartment next? You know he will. She was right. Mason knew where I lived, my routines, my schedule. The thought of constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'd appear with more excuses, made me feel trapped all over again. Stay with me until you find a new place, Alicia offered. My spare room is yours as long as you need it. A week later, I had signed a lease on a studio apartment in a secured building across town. I took a week off work to move, changing my routine completely. New coffee shop. New grocery store. New running route. I even switched to a different branch of my gym, one without personal trainers named Amber. Mason's attempts at contact gradually decreased. The daily texts became every other day, then weekly, then finally stopped altogether. I heard through mutual friends that he was officially dating someone from his gym. I didn't need 3 guesses to figure out who. 3 months after our breakup, I ran into him at a restaurant downtown. I was on a first date with a doctor I'd met through a colleague, a kind, genuine man who actually listened when I spoke. Mason was alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey, looking exactly as I remembered. Our eyes met briefly across the room. He started to stand, perhaps to approach me, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he simply nodded, an acknowledgement of what had happened, maybe even an apology. I turned back to my date without responding. The past was behind me. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted. If I should have given Mason a chance to explain. If what we had was worth fighting for despite his deception. But then I remember the journal. The way he meticulously documented his time with Amber in the very book I'd given him to help with his healing. The careful planning that went into maintaining his lie, week after week. The energy he'd invested in deceiving me rather than being honest. No, I didn't overreact. I simply respected myself enough to walk away. People often ask if the revenge felt good, exposing him, leaving those photos, blocking him without closure. The truth is more complicated. There was certainly satisfaction in the moment, watching his desperate texts roll in, knowing he finally understood what he'd lost. But real freedom didn't come from revenge. It came from rebuilding, a new home, new routines, new boundaries, new standards. It came from recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept anything less than complete honesty from a partner. Sometimes I still think about Mason. Not with longing, but with a strange kind of gratitude. His betrayal taught me how strong I really am. How clearly I can see through deception when I stop making excuses for someone else's behavior. How easily I can walk away from something that no longer serves me, no matter how much history we shared. I don't know if he ever went back to real therapy. If he ever addressed the anxiety that seemed genuine enough, despite everything else. Part of me hopes he did. But that's not my concern anymore. His story continues without me, as mine continues without him. And in the end, that's the most liberating revenge of all.